Thank you, Phil, for the intro, and thank you all so much for being here. I hope you had a chance to listen to the podcast reference in the blog post, but if not, the gist of it is that commodity prices are down compared to last year, while production continues to rise. Production costs continue to rise. So producers are looking for opportunities to cut back, delay purchases, reduce expenditures, and Will Bauer with Harvest Public Media really went on to kind of help us understand the impact on the overall agriculture economy with respect to those cutbacks. Some of the data that went into that podcast is shown here. Really what this is a summary from the USDA of farm production expenditures for the past 10 years. So it's a survey they send out to producers every year, and it's based on voluntary submission of information. But what they have been able to determine, and what this plot really shows, is the total expenditures on all farms that were surveyed as a function of year, so over the years, and that's in millions of hundreds of thousands of millions of dollars, and then the average per farm expenditures as a function of time. We can really see some stark trends here where expenditures continue to increase overall, but more sharply they've increased on a farm per farm basis. Some of the largest farm expenditures include feed, livestock related expenses, farm services, and labor, and that's across both crop systems and livestock systems. But specifically to crop farmers and crop systems, the largest expenditures include labor, farm services, crop inputs, and rent. Where those crop inputs, that's really where fertilizer and lime applications fall into place. And they can represent almost 30% of expenses on a farm per farm basis. So, overlay these increasing costs with the price of commodities, and things tend to work out. What we show here is the average commodity price for soy and corn as a function of time, and I've overlaid on that the average farm expenditures with the red plot. And we see that for the most part, commodity prices are supporting the increased cost of doing business until recently. This past year and starting really in 2023 showed a really stark drop in many key commodity prices. And this can mostly be attributed to the fact that the past couple of years, we've seen really high yields and huge harvests, leading to a large surplus of stocks and driving the per unit price down for a lot of commodities. So what's a farmer to do but to tighten the belt straps? Instead of buying a new tractor, maybe you MacGyver up a solution to get you through the year. Maybe you don't invest in purchasing an updated piece of equipment or increasing the size of your adventure. And you're looking for opportunities to really tighten those belt straps. What I'd like to argue and share with you is the importance of not skimping on soil and tissue testing. That there's a really significant potential return on investment in those systems that could really help you increase the profitability of your operation. So why soil test? On a really fundamental level, soil tests allow you to predict the likelihood of achieving a beneficial outcome from applying fertilizer or lime. Another way to think of it is evaluating the potential for nutrient loss on your property. And really what that comes down to is really understanding your crop requirements, what's available already in your soil, and understanding what your application rate needs to be for additional fertility. So if fertilizer represents 30% of your farm's annual expenditures, it's really worth investing in soil testing to ensure you're applying only what your crops actually need, and you're not, allowing those nutrients to just infiltrate across the land, through the land, or just across the surface of your land. So from an economic perspective, why do we soil test? So this is just a kind of back of the envelope calculation of a hypothetical operation where we're growing corn. We know from years and years of yield data that that corn requires a certain level of fertility in order to reach certain yield goals, and that's what's outlined here. I pulled prices for each of those fertilizers from an average price index from August of 2024. You do some simple math, and you come up with a per acre price of applying these 3 fertilizers and a total per acre price. Soil testing, on the other hand, generally we're soil testing on a 2.5 acre grid. Is what most folks recommend. Between collections and the actual analysis at the lab, it's roughly $8 per sample. But remember, we're only doing this every 3 or 4 years. So assuming a 4-year cycle, soil testing is only going to cost about $2 per acre per year. Tissue testing. Why would we want to tissue test? Really, what tissue testing affords you is the ability to inform management in real time. What we see here is kind of an infographic, but a plot that demonstrates the growth or yield of some hypothetical plant or crop as a function of nutrient content. And what we see is that as nutrients are added, growth increases until it reaches an optimum level or the critical level. And at that point, the plant will still continue to absorb nutrients, but those nutrients won't be used to improve growth or improve yield. So you're really applying, or those plants are consuming nutrients that aren't leading to an overall increase in yield. So if you have a good understanding as to what the actual nutrient levels are in your plant tissue, you stand to save a lot of money as you inform side dressing or other kind of fertilization techniques while the plant's already growing. Looking at the economic perspective again, we have the same summary of costs for fertilizer application. Tissue testing generally runs around $40 per sample. You're collecting 1 sample on average every 10 acres. And we generally recommend that tissue sampling is done twice per year. It just gives you a more complete picture. There's a lot of variability in that testing, but generally the 1 sample per 10 acres and the 2 samples per year will give you a really good idea as to what the nutrient balances are in your tissue. So again, a back of the envelope calculation, $40 per sample, 1 sample per 10 acres, 2 sample per year, 2 sampling periods per year. You're looking at roughly $8 per acre per year of an investment in tissue sampling. But what's the return on that investment? So let's say that you have a 400-acre farm and you do soil testing and a first round of tissue testing, and you realize that you can reduce your input by 25% and achieve the same yield goals. Maybe you've reached that critical level in your tissue testing already. So you invest roughly $4,000 for that year in soil and tissue testing. But reducing your fertilizer means that you have a savings of roughly $14,000 across that 400-acre farm, realizing a net savings of around $10,000. So this is real money, and these are real savings that people could potentially achieve if they're really looking carefully at their soil reports and tissue reports. So this is where a fertilizer salesperson or an ag retailer or somebody who's in the business of selling fertilizer might ask me or might pose the question, why would I want to make this argument? That's $14,000 of fertilizer that I'm not selling, that I'm not earning a commission on, that my company is not getting out into the market. And I think the best answer to that is that even though you may realize a hit, what you're doing is you're investing in your farmer. Agriculture is all about relationships. And if you can demonstrate that you care about the bottom line of the producers that you're working with, it's going to establish a level of trust that's really important in this field and in this industry that demonstrates that you're in it for them, that you're in it for the producer, It's going to build that relationship and ensure that they come back to you year after year, because the producer knows that you, as an ag retailer, as a consultant, have their best interest in mind, that you have their bottom line in mind. And in a field like agriculture, building that level of trust and building that relationship is key. So, kind of in summary, why should we bother testing both tissues and soil? We kind of looked at some scenarios, or a scenario where costs could be saved, costs could be realized. You could decrease your bottom line and increase your overall profitability of your system. Another key reason is you could potentially reduce nutrient pollution. So those nutrients that aren't being consumed by plants, that aren't going into increasing yield, are being introduced to the environment, and they're causing nutrient pollution in lakes, rivers, and streams. Another reason is that fertilizer, in particular nitrogen fertilizer, emits nitrous oxide when added nitrogen in the soil, and primarily in the form of nitrate, is converted through a process called denitrification. This releases nitrous oxide as a byproduct, especially in conditions of like a warm, wet soil with excess nitrogen. And this process can be greatly accelerated by the presence of readily available nitrogen in the form of a nitrogen fertilizer. So, and it's a very potent greenhouse gas. Over application of fertilizers has a really significant impact on soil health as well, or it can, especially over application of nitrogen. So many nitrogen fertilizers, especially ammonium-based ones, can increase soil acidity, so that throws off your pH as well. And that shift in the pH will impact beneficial soil microbes. Excessive nitrogen can also disrupt the natural balance of soil microorganisms, potentially reducing microbial activity and diversity. And high nitrogen application can lead to a decrease in soil organic matter, which is crucial for soil structure and water retention, which we talked about in our last webinar. But I think what's most important, or another really important reason why we test soil in particular, is that the availability of many nutrients is highly dependent on the presence of others. One of those relationships and dependencies that we're most familiar with is the dependency of nutrients on pH. So we know that nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus, sulfur are more or less available to plants based on the pH of the soil. And that's why your basic soil fertility package will include nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus, and pH, so that we kind of understand what the pH of the soil is, how acidic or alkaline it is, and maximize those conditions to optimize the uptake and uptake of these key macro major nutrients, and improve growth and yield. But another key ratio, well, similarly, nutrients impact each other. So not just pH, but the presence of both major and minor nutrients in the soil impact each other's uptake and their efficacy in soil systems. So what we have here is a little infographic that demonstrates some of the positive and negative interactions that nutrients have on each other. The red and the gray lines indicate an antagonistic effect. So potassium impacts negatively the absorption of magnesium. Calcium negatively impacts the absorption of boron. So those ions, or those nutrients, interfere and inhibit the absorption of the other nutrients. Whereas green lines here indicate a synergism, or a synergistic effect, where the two nutrients actually support each other, or one nutrient supports the absorption of another. So that one of the really key interactions that I think deserves additional attention, and that I'd like to delve into a little bit today, is the interaction between potassium and magnesium. And I want to kind of describe the process that's happening with this antagonistic effect. So what we have here is a very basic representation of some receptors interacting with different nutrients in the soil. So you don't see it here, but this is all underground. The blue receptors here are specific to potassium. They will only receive and bind with potassium, allowing that potassium to be taken up by the roots of the plant. The purple ones here are specific to either magnesium or potassium. So either one of these nutrients can bind with those receptors and impact root growth and be taken up. In a system where potassium is flooding the soil system and there's an abundance of potassium in the soil, way more than the plant needs, potassium will outcompete magnesium for these kind of universal receptors and block any magnesium present from interacting and being absorbed by the plant. Conversely, when there's an excess of magnesium, magnesium will outcompete potassium for these universal binding sites, but potassium will still be able to bind to these potassium-specific sites. So in a system where there's an excess of potassium, magnesium is inhibited, but in an when there's a system of excessive magnesium, the uptake of potassium will not be inhibited. A&L Canada has done a lot of field work and fundamental research trying to understand what the ideal ratio or relationship between potassium and magnesium is. And through lots of trials and lots of research in the field, they found that an ideal relationship is about 0.25. So for every one magnesium unit in the soil or ion in the soil, for every one potassium ion in the soil, roughly 4 magnesium ions should be present. And they found that ratio corresponds to and correlates with very high yields and improved yields and improved efficiency of the uptake of either of those nutrients. So it's not just about the overall soil level of different macro and micronutrients in your soil. It's about finding the right balance between key macro and micronutrients. And that's why we like to say balanced is best. We wouldn't know these soil ratios if we didn't soil test. There's no other way to know what those ratios are. And by kind of understanding not just the absolute amount of different nutrients in your soil, but knowing the ratios of them all, you make your fertilizer work harder for you. We all know the old adage, work smarter, not harder. And this is one really easy way to kind of put that into action. The bottom line is that you're spending a lot of money on fertilizer, upwards of 30% of your overall budget, and it's just going to get more expensive. So you want to make sure that your fertilizer is working its hardest for you. And I think that brings up another point where, especially with the potassium-magnesium relationship, potassium is part of your traditional NPK, pH, OM basic fertility test, but you need to be able to look at the magnesium and those micronutrients as well, because we know it plays an important role in the overall balance and uptake of even the major nutrients. So make sure you ask for the complete soil analysis when you're getting your soil test done. I work at Woods End Laboratories. We are one of the many labs in the Devron network of soil testing laboratories and tissue testing laboratories. We do both soil health and soil fertility, along with many of the other labs in the family. So if you have questions about any more of these key ratios, or you're interested in understanding the cost benefit of the complete soil test package versus a basic soil test package, please don't hesitate to reach out. We have a network of laboratories along with collection crews throughout the US and Canada, and we'd be happy to work with you. So thank you very much. And we hope to see you again at our next webinar. Thank you.